All right, guys, welcome back to part two. So, the last video was on cooking tips regarding recovering from chronic fatigue syndrome. And today we're going to talk about diet tips. Some of the things we'll talk about today are how to judge foods, whether food is helping or hurting us, the importance of blood sugar and how to manage it, whether you should work with a nutritionist, caffeine, and whether you should consume it during recovery. And we'll talk about some other things, and I'll throw in some example meals and snacks that I've been eating that I've been enjoying. So let's get started. Diet tips. So the first thing to talk about with diet, I think, is how is food impacting us? How can we judge food? So for me, I consistently feel a little bit worse after eating any meal, no matter what it is. But depending on what I eat, I might feel much worse, or it might be very, very subtle. And that time window is about like 20 minutes after eating to like 2 hours after eating. In that time window, I feel noticeably worse. So that's how I judge food, and I would recommend you try that out for yourself. And one of the ways I know this is true for me is like I might eat a meal and then sit down and just watch some TV, hang out. And then 20, 30 minutes later into that, chilling and watching TV process, I start to notice some symptoms coming up. I'm like, whoa, like, why is this happening? And then I remember like, oh, yep, I'm just, digesting that food that I ate, 30 minutes ago or whatever, because I wasn't doing anything. But it's just the body is working on stuff. So I recommend judging your food based on how you feel 20 minutes to 2 hours after eating. But also, guys, we do have to judge how food makes us feel over the course of like days and weeks as well. So this is very tricky. But for example, if I've been feeling really well, like my health is doing pretty well, and I eat like a bowl of ice cream, it's probably no big deal. Like I might not even notice any symptoms after. It's probably fine. But if I continue to do that like day over day, this has happened to me in the past where I've noticed like, man, everything else in my life is like pretty good. I got my, my exercise and my activities throughout the day are pretty dialed in, pretty good. But I'm waking up with a little less energy. Maybe it's because I'm eating too many things that are like high glycemic. So this has happened to me before. And that's why I continue to like be pretty strict with my own diet. And so yeah, just keep an eye on it. It's very tricky. It's very hard to parse because there's so many variables that determine whether we're feeling better or feeling worse. But if you feel like everything else is kind of dialed in and like you're maybe having a little decline and you've been eating lots of sugary stuff, that might be a contributor. So, don't stress about it, but just keep an eye on it. And we want to judge how food makes us feel in the immediate aftermath of about, within 2 hours of eating, but then also over days and weeks. Tip number 2, blood sugar is king. This for me, it has been the number one biggest impact by far with all food stuff is trying to keep my blood sugar not having crazy spikes. There's a lot that goes into that. We're going to talk about it right now. I also worked with a nutritionist for a while, and she emphasized the importance of this, not only for me, but also for healthy people, that trying to maintain like a stable blood sugar is really important. And that's why eating things like whole grains is good for you. So how to avoid big blood sugar spikes. First of all, number 1, avoid sugar. This is probably pretty obvious, but if you're eating tons of sugar all the time, like cookies, ice cream, all that stuff, soda, let's try to avoid that. Sugary drinks are probably the worst because it's just sugar and it goes straight into, it gets digested really quickly. This also includes things like Gatorade as well as fruit juice. And the way I figured out that I was so sensitive to these blood sugar spikes was very early in my recovery. I just randomly drank like a Coke one afternoon, and that was it. I didn't eat anything else. I just drank a Coke. And then like 30 minutes later, I felt terrible. And I was like, what happened? And then I thought like, oh, well, maybe it's from like the sugar in the soda. And then I would also notice like if I made like a big burrito for dinner, especially if it had like lots of white rice, I would notice like a really big rise in symptoms after that too. And I was like, man, maybe it's from like the white rice or like, the carbs or something. And yeah, so those things matter. Tip number 2, balance each meal and snack and avoid carb-heavy meals. So make sure each snack or meal isn't all carbs. It needs protein and fat as well. These are kind of the 3 primary macros that you need to balance with each meal. That's what balance means. So fat, protein, and then try to keep the carbs on the lower side. I generally aim to have those kind of roughly like, 1-to-1 ratio of all of those. And then you also want to make sure you have some dietary fiber in your diet. So for example, let's talk about the fiber thing first. So if you drink apple juice, like that's just sugar basically, that's going to have a really big spike. If you eat just an apple, the apple at least has some dietary fiber. And my understanding is that also kind of helps slow the digestion of the blood sugar so it doesn't hit your system quite as fast. So eating an apple is better than just drinking apple juice. But you shouldn't really just eat an apple on its own, again, because it is it's basically only carbs and kind of sugar. So that is going to have a big spike on your system. So what I mean by balance is you want to make sure that every time you're eating carbs, that every meal has at least some protein and some fat to go along with it, because those things kind of slow down the absorption of the blood sugar of the other items. And I'm not exactly sure what that ratio should be. I think I remember reading in a nutrition book that they recommended like a 1-to-1-to-1 of like fats, proteins, and carbs. So, I can't tell you the exact ratio. You might have to consult some nutrition books or ask a nutritionist, like, hey, what's the general recommendation? And then also, what's best for me. But yeah, implementing some sort of balance made a massive difference for me, because if I eat like a super carb heavy meal, I would basically fall into like a food coma. But with CFS, it's much more significant than that, and I basically would get like a really big rise in symptoms that would be very uncomfortable. So switching this balance up made a big difference. So actually, the order you eat things matters as well. So try to eat the fat and the protein first, um, or at the same time at least, because for example, if you just drink a Coke and then like eat other stuff like fats and proteins, like the Coke hits your stomach first, and that's going to get digested into the bloodstream really really quickly. So you want to eat the fats and proteins first, so you kind of have something going on in there, and then eat the carbs later on. And carbs would include anything with flour, and then fruits as well. Tip number 3: eat whole grains. So the reason whole grains are better than refined grains is because um, they get digested more slowly. There's like some science to it, like they're like complex carbs, and your system has to break down. There's kind of like three parts to them. Basically, the way I think about it is like imagine like a little like rice kernel encased in like a sheath. Like that's a complex carb versus like a regular carb is like just the rice kernel. And like the more refined thing gets absorbed more quickly, whereas when it's in a sheath, your body has to like break that down, and it's a slower process. You can think of it also as like if you're eating pistachios and you have to physically like open them each one yourself to eat them, like you're gonna eat pretty slowly. But if you have like an unshelled like cup, like you could just eat tons super fast. That's kind of the difference. So we want to avoid pasta. We also want to avoid white rice and white bread. This is really hard for me because I love all of those things. But I'm really disciplined about it now because I've just felt time and time again that it really does make a big difference for me. And there's actually a really great YouTube channel that compares the impact of different foods on blood sugar. This guy like puts a blood sugar monitor on his arm and then eats things and then shows you the graph basically. So I'll link to that down below. And he has a comparison video on pasta that's really great. And unfortunately, whole wheat pasta is also still like has a huge spike, which is very validating for me because I tried that a while ago and I still felt terrible after. And I was like, man, like whole wheat pasta, is this really, it should be whole wheat, right? It's still just, it gives you this really big spike. So just avoid all pasta is my recommendation. That's what works for me. And it's also backed up by this guy's experiments. One that did actually do pretty well though was chickpea pasta, so you guys could try that out. I haven't tried it yet, but it did well in his video. I also switched to brown rice a couple years ago in my recovery, and it's made a big difference. White rice is just really high glycemic, apparently. People told me that my whole life, and I was like, nah, what do you mean? Like, everyone eats rice, it's healthy, what are you talking about? And I've just seen time and time again that I feel bad after eating white rice. So my go-tos now are quinoa and brown rice. I just started making quinoa more recently. Is really great, especially with like Indian dishes like tikka masala or something like that. The texture of the quinoa is like really good. Highly recommend. Tip number 3, work with a nutritionist. Nourish is a really great online service that pairs you with a nutritionist. And I basically got 4 or 5 free sessions with an awesome nutritionist. So it was really great. And reading recent books on nutrition is also really good. I learned a lot. My nutritionist recommended a couple that I could kind of check out just for general understanding. But there is a lot of conflicting information in nutrition books and just in the nutrition world in general. Things are kind of constantly changing. So having someone who's like up to date on the latest, understanding and can kind of filter through things and tell you like, no, this is like currently what is the best advice. That is like irreplaceable. So having her being able to steer me and maybe correct some parts of the books that weren't quite accurate was a really big deal. And overall, she gave me a few things to work on each week, very actionable, and they made a really big difference. They were just very positive changes. And like I mentioned, I met with my nutritionist about once a month. I think normally she meets with people more like once every 2 weeks. But for me, just because of the way chronic fatigue syndrome affects me, once a month was better. And I would recommend that as a starting frequency because I'd like have my call with her and we talk about like, okay, here's some things we can try to tweak and improve or experiment with. But then throughout the week, I might wake up one day and not feel up for like cooking or prepping or like going to the store or whatever it is to actually like implement those things before the next time I'm going to see her. And also it takes quite a while to assess like how something is making us feel and impacting our condition. So yeah, once a month was what was best for me. And she was like, yeah, no problem. And also just a little extra bonus tip for you guys. There's a lot of parallels with this with if you're working with like a physical therapist, like if you have like back pain or something. A lot of times with physical therapy, they might want you to come in like a couple times a week. And like, I know for me, that was like way too much, but I started going in like once every 2 weeks to see a physical therapist to like work on some things. And, they were able to work with me on that and it was all good. So just in general, I'd recommend, just tune into like what seems like the right frequency for like what you can implement and what feels right for you. And then talk to the people who are helping you and come to the best solution for you guys. Caffeine. So let's talk about caffeine. Not exactly nutrition, but kind of related. I basically avoid all caffeine now. So I kind of think it's counterproductive to addressing the root cause of chronic fatigue syndrome, which is that kind of like our nervous system is too heightened. Like it's too activated. Like we just needed to chill out. And I used to drink coffee like every day, like 1 to 3 cups of coffee, but I cut that out like a couple of years ago. And I think it's been helpful. So now like here and there, I'll still do like a cup of decaf coffee. But actually if you're like stone cold sober on caffeine, like you never drink it, even a cup of decaf is like a noticeable like boost. And so I tried this recently and I could tell like it wasn't the state of being, like emotional state, psychological state that I want to cultivate for recovery. And I think it was impeding recovery more than helping it. The gardeners are working outside now, so it might get a little loud. I'll try to like edit this out. But yeah, we're just going to try to wrap up this video because I'm kind of getting a little worn out here. Tip number 5 is make rules for yourself. So a while ago, I was eating too much ice cream just in the evenings. I just love ice cream, and occasionally I was just doing it a little too often. I might be eating like 2 to 5 times out of the week. Or even every day. And I was like, you know what, this is a little too much. I think it's impacting me just from all the sugar. So I wanted to cut back, but I also like didn't want to stop completely because it's really enjoyable and I love it. So what I started doing was I made a rule for myself. I could have 1 bowl of ice cream per week. And it was great. Whenever I was feeling it, I'd be like, all right, tonight's the night. I'm going to eat my ice cream. It's awesome. And then I just wouldn't eat any ice cream until the following Monday hit. And it was really great. So I didn't overdo it. I just had a simple rule for myself. I was able to follow it and eat at the amount that I thought was appropriate. All right, guys. So those were my cooking and diet tips. So I hope those were helpful. And be sure to catch the PDF or Google Doc that I linked to down below that has all these tips written out, but also it'll have example meals and snacks that I eat that I like, that I recommend, that you guys might find helpful or try out. So yeah. Like I mentioned in my last video, I don't currently have plans to make more videos really, but if you guys have any questions about recovery or if there's anything else you want to know, just comment down below. And I'd be happy to make some more videos and try to help more of you guys out. So you can subscribe to the channel if you want. In my next video, I have just like a quick bonus section on kitchen knives because I went down a whole rabbit hole recently and I learned a lot, and I'll just throw some quick knowledge at you guys if you want to kind of upgrade your setup. But yeah, otherwise, I hope this was helpful and I will see you next time. Thanks a lot.